stage for the first time ever at Forwarder events, the first time ever at this type of format, we now have a panel. So let's welcome to the panel. We'll hear from them in a moment. Come on up. Big round of applause, please. Paul, Tom, Felix, and Claire. Good stuff. Please grab a seat. And
hopefully everyone can hear me. Thank you very much for having me. My name is Clare. I'm the Chief Executive of the UK Warehousing Association. So we are a trade body. We represent nearly 1,000 member companies. We talk about warehousing. We raise standards in warehousing. We build community and we help our members.
Hi, my name is Phoenix. I'm a carbon and energy consultant at Jacobs Solutions. If I come across as nervous, it's because I am. This is the very first in-person conference that I've ever done. I did a couple of virtual ones during lockdown. But yeah, so I work in the carbon energy team, and I specialise in carbon baselining, which is basically helping companies to calculate what they're emitting, and also carbon monitoring. And I'm starting to branch into developing net zero strategies and carbon reduction strategies.
I'm Tom Patrinos. I'm a systems engineer at the Connected Places Catapult. So for those of you who don't know, the Connected Places Catapult are partly government funded organisation. They're part of the Catapult network. Each of the Catapult centres are innovation accelerators for a particular niche. We are in transport places and transport cities and place leadership. So I'm a systems engineer, like I said, in the new mobility technologies team, and specialise in hydrogen transport applications.
Hi, my name is Paul Bathgate from Doncaster. iPort Rail, so I'm a director for iPort Rail, which actually is the intervention point for a business called Eco2Loco. Best way to describe Eco2Loco, as I did in the speed dating, is Uber for rail freight. So it's about providing you and the larger community greater access to rail freight. A couple of relevant facts. So there's 6 million containers imported into the UK each year. In TEUs it's slightly more. Only 10% move on rail, so 90% on road. If that volume was to move onto rail, it would save UK carbon footprint 76%. 76% carbon footprint instantly saved if you move from road to rail. So in terms of carbon benefits, it's pretty apparent.
We're just going to cover the absolute basics with a quick headline about what is net zero and what is your interpretation. I think, Claire, just to sort of kick things off, can you give a quick overview about what is net zero? And then Tom, I'll probably ask you about what are greenhouse gases. Just want to get a common agreement about what they are. What is the common agreement now in 2023? What is net zero? What are we heading towards 2050 and so forth? Claire?
Okay, so no pressure. I'm actually a person that knows about warehousing, but now I'm going to describe net zero to you. But of course, we all have to know about net zero, right? So in the atmosphere around the Earth, there are certain gases which make that atmosphere heat up. And those gases are the ones we call greenhouse gases, which Tom's going to explain. I think there's maybe 6 or 7 of them, something like that. And when we talk about carbon, it's really like shorthand for talking about all of those gases, because the main one is carbon dioxide. So when we say carbon, we don't actually mean like pieces of coal. We're talking about carbon dioxide, which is a very, very stable gas. And that's been emitted into our atmosphere in very high proportions since the advent of the Industrial Revolution, so like 1850. And because it's so stable, it's still there. And it's causing our atmosphere to heat up, which is dangerous for all sorts of reasons. And partly it's dangerous for social reasons. So the people who are going to suffer the most as we see climate change the way that our world operates and the way that our economy operates are going to be people living in poverty, women, people who have the least power within our social and economic structures. So from a point of view of humanity, climate change is a really critical risk to us, because ultimately it could be an existential risk, but en route it will also be a risk that capitalises or increases inequalities socially. So in order to try and avoid that, what we're trying to do is not emit greenhouse gases, capture back some of those which are already in the atmosphere and prevent the Earth from heating up. Is that a good enough explanation?
Yeah, someone who says they know nothing about greenhouse gases, that was probably the most absolutely coherent and perfect summary I've ever heard, actually. So, round of applause for great knowledge. Sincerely. Thank you. So, Tom, you've had your powder dry and now it's been taken away, but what can you add to that? Tell us just a bit more about, you've heard what Claire said, beautiful summary. What else can we take away from what Claire said there? And where are we at in 2023? What's the common agreement now?
So we've got the net zero by 2050 target, so that's something that the government committed to in 2019. So that feels like a long way away, but when you think about how long it takes to change technologies, energy supply, energy use. I mean, if we look at ships, for example, they've got, some of them have got 30-year replacement cycle. So if they've been replaced in the last 3 years and they're not running on zero emission propulsion, then pardon the pun, we've missed the boat. It's I know it feels like a long way away, but there's a real need to act now.
Okay, nicely put. Thank you, Tom. Okay, so going back to Claire, obviously Felix, we're going to talk to you a bit about what you're up to at the moment and the stuff you've been discovering, and obviously Paul as well, a bit more about the travel freight, etc. Claire, so tell us a bit more about, you say about warehouses, but I know is it right to say you've been innovating using solar panels, UKWA? Tell us a bit about that. You've got the conch.
So we've been doing some research. I think back in the day when people started to talk about net zero, the idea is that we would control demand, that we would need less fossil fuels. So we were going to need less electricity and less petrol and less aviation fuel and less natural gas. Let's control demand and need less of these things, and that will be part of the way that we try and prevent all of these dangerous emissions into our atmosphere. What we've learned as things have gone on is that in order to wean ourselves off fossil fuels, we're going to end up needing much more electricity, like maybe 7 times as much here in the UK to what we would have been using a few years ago. And in order to do that, we don't just need to replace coal-fired power stations with renewable. We need to ramp up renewable energy sources exponentially to be able to cater for things like domestic heating, which is predominantly done with gas boilers in people's homes, because if we electrify that with air source heat pumps or other types of heat pumps, for example, then we're going to need more electricity for that. And for those who are in the room, I guess the story about freight transport is really key. So for rail that Paul mentioned, if we electrify or if we switch to hydrogen, which Tom spoke about, we're going to need electricity to make the hydrogen. So either way, we need shitloads more electricity. And in order to do that, we want to do it renewably, right? So we don't want to have to use fossil fuels. We don't want our coal-powered fire stations. We don't really want gas either, although it is slightly better. Renewable energy sources are the future. But only 5% of warehouses have any solar panels on the roof. And if they do, they normally only have maybe 10% of the roof space covered. And we just felt like that seems wrong. So we commissioned a big piece of research last year to look into this. And we found it's not all that straightforward. There are a few barriers that make it difficult. And one of them is that companies who looked at this 10 years ago and wrote it off as a bad idea just didn't realise that it's worth looking at again. So the maths of the cost of electricity has gone up, as we all know. Energy prices have really spiked, but also the cost of solar panels has come right down, and also they've become more efficient. So the amount of electricity you can get, the bang for your buck, has improved. Even in the last 10 years, the cost of solar panels has come down like 80% or something ridiculous like that. So there's not all that much government subsidy available at the moment, but don't let that stop you. Part of our role as the trade body is to inform our members and audiences like you guys here that it is really worth looking at this again and look at it right now.
Straight question. In a nutshell, what are the best tips you can offer as the head of certainly this sector for those who are looking to discover in any way about adding a bit more sustainability, let's say warehouses? What's the best way to, what are the 3 action points somebody could make to make a difference using solar panels? How would they go about it? What are the prerequisites?
So we've prepared a toolkit. So if I was being a bit tongue-in-cheek, I would say your first best bet is to join the UKWA Housing Association, and then you'll get access to our toolkit, which will talk you through this. But I think more broadly speaking, start by measuring. Just have a look at your electricity bill and see, how much you're spending and who you're spending it with. Back in 2010, the Carbon Trust did some research about the electricity demand in warehouses, and they found about 75% of warehouse energy use was from the lighting. That's not really the case anymore. So it's worth looking at it again, because loads of people have already converted to LED lights, for example. The story's a little bit different in temperature-controlled warehouses. So if you're running a frozen or refrigerated warehouse, then that equipment will be what drives your electricity demand. But all warehouses need electric, and to be fair, if anything, it's going up. A lot of people are electrifying from LPG forklift trucks, moving them towards battery-powered, introducing more conveyors, robotics, ASRS systems, all of which are electrically powered. So just start by having a look at that. Then the next thing I would say is, let's say most warehouses are on some sort of lease deal. I know some people own them, but imagine that your warehouse is leased. The next thing to do is talk to your landlord, because you would be amazed how receptive landlords will be. Landlords have got their own ESG targets to meet, and you might think, well, this is going to be really complicated because I'd like to put solar panels on, but I don't actually own the building. Put that to one side, and especially if you've got our toolkit, that will help you. And then the third thing, I think, is to make sure that you use a reputable installer. So companies that are registered with Solar Energy UK, who are the trade body for their sector, are the kind of companies I would recommend. So those are my 3 points.
Great, and this is a trend, obviously, a trend you're noticing. Is there a spike? Is it like a hockey stick? What's the take-up of solar panels in your sector in warehousing?
Well, the amount that people are talking about it has improved, and I'm going to take a bit of the credit for that, because we've, as a result of our research, we've really tried to raise the profile. We went to the House of Lords last October and talked to politicians about how important it is to put more solar panels on warehouse rooftops. But although people are talking about it more, we're still not seeing the take-up, so that's one of the reasons I've come here today.
Got it. Okay, nice one, Claire. Thanks very much indeed. Paul, remind us a bit about your role again, and the opportunities and advantages that would pit people against each other. You know what I'm going here, don't you? Very nice shoes, by the way.
Cheers. How about yours were nice?
Thanks very much. Cheers. One of only 12 in the UK. That's what the salesman told me. I'm sure he says that to everyone. So, opportunities and advantages of rail over road when it comes, rail versus road when it comes to emissions.
Yeah, so just like to come back to Claire's point. At iPort, we've got at least 6 million square feet of warehousing, and we have 6 solar panels. And those 6 solar panels are on iPort Rail to manage our terminal operating system should the power go down. I add that in because Carl and I were at a hydrogen conference yesterday for Doncaster, and we're looking to develop a hydrogen solution. We have investments in place. We have the opportunity, 2027 is what we're looking at. So putting solar panels on the roof could create green hydrogen. All we need to do is work out where the hydrogen would go. Trains, so we've got no hydrogen trains in the UK. We really haven't got any hydrogen HGVs. I think Heisen have got something out there, but it's prohibitively expensive. We've got reach stackers and various plant equipment and forklift trucks and tugs, all on diesel. So I think the challenge is actually joining up some of the supply chain. And from a warehousing perspective, think about the integration across that supply chain, whether that's road or rail. So I think there's opportunity there. Rail could be part of that solution in terms of moving to hydrogen, and we're some way off. So in terms of immediate benefits, and this is what I was trying to share earlier on, is just by changing your haulage arrangement from road to rail, there's an instant benefit today. So a typical container moving from Felixstowe to Doncaster, if you switch that into rail, that would save about 200 kilograms of CO2. Carl, is that about right? Per movement. So if you've got 5 a week, there's a ton of carbon saved. And against your corporate commitment, could be quite significant.
Big numbers.
Big numbers.
Yeah.
Big numbers.
Thank you for sponsoring today, by the way, as well. I really appreciate that, one of the sponsors. So up until recently, I lived in Portishead in the southwest of England. In fact, very close to where Craig started out near Abraham, actually. And I looked out over the water and the ships going back towards the end, big ships with big names on them and big containers and many thousand probably. And Portishead didn't have a rail connection. I'm sure they used to be back before 64, whenever they were closed down. So why aren't more people, why aren't the sector using rail enough? That's a bad question. Do you know what I mean, though?
I think it's
why
the point.
aren't more people using rail?
The point earlier on is that for every 10 containers coming out of a port, only one's going to rail. So
1 in 10?
1 in 10. 1 in 10. So the
That's
opportunity
surprising.
for rail is significant. The opportunity for the UK in terms of carbon saving is significant. I think fundamentally there's quite a few reasons. First of all, trains don't tend to have a steering wheel, so they will not deliver to your door. So you've always got to have a final or a first mile solution in place. So it's about integrating road and rail. That's not straightforward. Also, the rail industry is quite insular. It speaks its own language, as most industries do. I'm not sure rail speaks the language of freight forwarders, for example. So it's easier for a freight forwarder to book a road solution which will deliver to your door. I think that's another initiative. The subsidies for rail to bring the price point down for rail for some clients is minimal. So back to government subsidies, not just in rail but across this whole carbon sector, I think is missing. But we've demonstrated that actually rail can work for some customers for most of the time. So for every client we've introduced to rail, we've retained them and we've grown business with them. But it does need to integrate with road, so we are looking at a road and rail based solution.
How useful are events like this with 100 people or a few hundred people in building connections so the conversation can start? Because it does sound like there needs to be a bit more dialogue. As you said, freight forwarding is always talking to rail, warehousing, integral part of this. The whole, are these events kind of useful with put your cards on the table?
I'll tell you in a few weeks, I think. Is one answer. I think it's a start. I think we've managed over the last year or so at iPort to increase the awareness. So the awareness is there, but it's about inertia. So if you have a relationship in your supply chain, unless that supply chain is broken, you tend to stay with it. So what we need is more shocks, I believe. So we have more shocks, environmental shocks, marketing shocks. So Brexit was great for rail. Sounds crazy, but it's great for rail. Driver shortage, HGV driver shortage is great for rail. Increasing fuel price was great for rail. Issues down at Felixstowe, Suez Canal, great. Any shock, I think, causes industry to look at itself, look at its supply chain, and say, could we do this different? So I think we need more shocks, to be blunt. And the big shock that's coming is more like lemmings falling off a cliff, and it's way before 2050. To your point, if we don't do something now, it will be too late. It may already be too late.
Sobering words there. Thank you. Part of the whole community from freight forwarding and beyond. Rail, of course, sea and air. We have an expert. Airbus doing some innovations. I've heard about hydrogen-powered ships. Has anyone heard about that? Some interesting stuff. Maybe commercial airliners with low emissions or zero emissions. How that will work, I don't know. Hydrogen, I know a little bit about it. I've seen YouTube videos about hydrogen-powered cars. It looks pretty cool to me. Tell us about the pros and also, please, the cons. And if you could just remind us as well, Tom, just a little bit about your role as well, what you do, and why you become an expert. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. So, you hear hydrogen. Well, I'll quickly remind you, I'm a systems engineer, so I work. It's not super technical in terms of engineering. It's not just detailed design of a single component, but it's looking at the broader systems. If we were to introduce this technology, what would be the wider implications? And that's not just technology focused. That's also things like training, health and safety, environmental issues, economic business. So hydrogen. So in terms of the pros and the cons, the first pro is obviously that it's touted as a zero emission fuel. So that means you can run it through a fuel cell. and you end up with just water as a byproduct. But obviously, you get the energy, and you can power an electric motor, and you can power whatever you've got, whether that's a plane, boat, car, HGV, whatever. So that's benefit number one. Benefit number two is if we compare hydrogen compared to battery electric, or we compare it because that's another one of the options for zero emission propulsion. It's got more energy density per unit space. So what that means effectively is if you've got the same size fuel tank, you've got more range if you use hydrogen compared to battery electric. Or the alternative is you can reduce the size of your propulsion system and go the same distance that you would if you were designing for a battery electric. Another benefit of hydrogen is that it's much lighter than batteries, and that's part of the reason why you don't see many big battery electric plane concepts, and it's part of the reason why Airbus are looking at hydrogen for their zero-E concepts, which are liquid hydrogen powered planes. So yeah, that's another one of the benefits. The third thing is that it in terms of refueling time, it's very comparable to petrol and diesel or fossil fuels. So if you've got an HGV and you run out of charge and you've got a 500-600 kilowatt hour battery pack and you're looking at a 350 kilowatt charging speed, you've got probably about 2 hours until you recharge fully. Whereas hydrogen, it won't be quite as quick as petrol and diesel, but it will be towards that end of the scale. And that's obviously very important if you're looking at things like turnaround time. If you've got something that's in constant use, that's obviously vital. In terms of the cons, I think that the main con is, well, hydrogen firstly comes in all sorts of different colours, and the colours refer to the way that the hydrogen is produced. You've got grey hydrogen, which is how it's produced currently, which is using fossil fuels, and that releases a huge amount of carbon. It's actually worse to use if you were to power a lorry from grey hydrogen instead of diesel. It's actually worse for the environment in terms of emissions. So we move on from grey to blue, which is exactly the same, except you capture all the carbon and you store it somewhere. So not all of it is released to the atmosphere. And then the third main one is green, which is made from renewable energy. And green hydrogen is made from a process called electrolysis. So you plug an electrolyzer, it's called, into renewable energy, and out comes and you put water in as well, and it splits the water into hydrogen and oxygen. One of the cons of that is, as Claire mentioned, it uses loads and loads of energy. So if you were to, if we take battery electric cars, for example, they work. Companies coming out with 300, 400 mile ranges on their cars now. If we were to swap that to hydrogen, for every unit of electricity you make from renewable sources, you've got to take that and turn that into hydrogen. You've got to compress the hydrogen, transport it, put it into a fuel cell to power the vehicle, which is itself not that efficient either, and you end up with 30% of the energy you started with. If you go to if you stick with your battery electric option, you're looking at 75-80% of the energy that you started with. So what that means is you need more wind farms to make that energy, to make the hydrogen. You need better distribution of that energy, and you need generally some more better reinforced energy system, which is obviously very expensive. So that's one of the main downsides. There's also the conversation of the safety, and that's kind of there's a positive and a negative there. Hydrogen obviously behaves differently to fossil fuels, and it's very light. It's the lightest element in the universe, and that means if there's a leak, hydrogen will just float upwards at a speed of 20 meters a second, I think it is, and that's great if you're in an open environment, because what that means is you have a leak of hydrogen, and instead of it pooling around you and waiting to be ignited, it's flying up into the sky, and you don't have to worry about it if it's. And also, it's probably going away from ignition sources if you're in the open atmosphere. But if we were in here, we're in an enclosed space, the hydrogen's going to gather in the ceiling, and it's got quite a low ignition energy, which means that only a small spark can set it off. So yeah, positive and negative from safety.
Yeah, that's a lot of pressure. Yeah, so as I said, I work for a consultancy, and we kind of focus on not only calculating emissions, but also helping companies in a whole range of sectors, from the water, transport industry, health industry, national security. Yeah, we're helping them to decarbonize. And I think the thing with this industry is it's ever changing. There's always research and innovation being done, into new concepts. And so it's definitely a learning curve. I don't know there's no way that I could know everything about this industry. But yeah, I guess specifically maybe relating to freight, one of our major clients in the airport industry, we work closely with them on their net zero strategy, and part of that is they will come up with some concepts, and we basically help to rationalize them and see the feasibility of them. And one of the things that they are trying to achieve is transitioning all of their operational vehicles to electric vehicles. And as I said, this is a contained site, so all the vehicles will only remain on the site. So it's maybe slightly different to freight, that they're not traveling large distances in one go. But yeah, they are constantly in operation. And yeah, one of the things that they're trying to do, transfer to electric vehicles, and they have a fleet of about 2,000 operational vehicles, and the calculations that we've done based on their their vehicle movements, is that they'll be saving around 30,000 tons of CO2 every year by transitioning their 2,000 vehicles to electric vehicles. And just to kind of give some context to that, a return flight from London to Perth is about 3 tons of CO2. So 30,000 tons is about the equivalent of 20 full commercial flights going to Perth and back. And yeah.
Let's look at some of the smaller ways we can all reduce our carbon footprint. You're an expert. I know you work with some really big companies. You can't mention who they are, but you've probably got a really good overview, actually, given your role. So what are some of the things that we can all do, a bit like I asked earlier on? Give us a few action points that we could do right now in 2023, beginning of the year. You're hearing it from the horse's mouth. What sort of things can we do to make a difference?
Yeah. So something that seems really simple, and probably a lot of people have done it, but is like going paperless. So we had a client recently, they wanted us to calculate the emissions of all the benefits from just going paperless. And for a project where they typically would print out maybe 200 documents a month, we calculated what it would be like to do this all virtually instead. And over an 18-month period, for just 200 documents a month, they would save about 10 tons of CO2, and that equates to the equivalent of one person in the UK's yearly emissions. And so that's just something really simple, just 200 documents. I guess on the other side is maybe things like, so one of our companies, one of our clients are depot industry, depot warehouses, and they just in their ambient storage area, they had 600 light bulbs, and the other year they moved them all to LED, and just by changing 600 light bulbs, which is, I think in total they maybe had over 10,000 light bulbs, but just these 600, that saved them about 40 tons of carbon a year, and that is the equivalent of a typical house in the UK. So they emit about 40 tons of CO2 per year.
Good examples, thank you. Look, I'd like to leave a bit more time because there's such a collective wisdom here, I think, and also lots of people here as well from different parts of the sector. I'd like to ask you, the audience, if you've got any questions. If you've got a question, please raise your hand. Could one of the forward team members lend me a hand? I will give you a microphone. If you could pass it around. And if you could keep the question, just stand up if you want to ask a question, say your name and maybe your business, and a short question if you will, starting there at the back, please, sir. And if you could direct your question to one of the members of the panel or to all members of the panel, just make it nice and clear. Okay, good stuff. Thank you, panel.
Hello, it's Eddie Ryan, Magna Logistics. Two questions really. Number one, what's the benefit of solar panels on top of roofs of warehousing? How many people are using wind power on the top of warehouses? That's the first question. And the second question is, what calculations are done in the extraction of cobalt in terms of electric vehicles and the amount of carbon that's used to extract that cobalt and the impact to people?
Wind turbines on top, but I'm going to hazard a guess that it's fewer than have solar panels, and we know the solar panels is only 5%, so it must be a tiny proportion. But I guess what your question hints at is that we may only be at the start of some of these technologies. So I've heard, for example, that there are cassettes that you can install on a warehouse rooftop that incorporate both types. You know, you can have solar thermal, solar PV, and a wind turbine all in the same device, which can be installed on warehouse rooftops. Of course, these are very expensive at the moment, but as I mentioned before, for the conventional solar PV, the price of that has come down, and so you would imagine the price of these kind of things will also come down, and they may become more affordable. But the second part of your question was about the embodied kind of, well, I guess cobalt's not carbon, is it? But the impact on the environment of those component parts, which can be problematic. And again, I would point to the fact that we think that technology is developing all of the time, and by becoming consumers and buyers of these technologies, we're really helping that development to happen. I suspect I should possibly hand over to the engineer on the panel, and I'm not sure if there's more that you could say on that.
Yeah, so I mean, I don't know the numbers. I'm sure there are studies that have looked into the embodied carbon of extracting that cobalt from the ground. I don't have the exact numbers, like I said, but what I can say is that the way I think about electric vehicles and the constituent parts that go into them, it's not a perfect industry. It's far from it, definitely. But if you think about where your diesel comes from and where your petrol comes from, that's got to be extracted from the ground, and then you burn it as well. So, you know, if you could make that comparison, and I would argue that probably cobalt is worse currently, but electric car batteries are lasting a lot longer. Obviously not the original Nissan Leaf in 2010, but the new modern batteries with battery management systems are lasting longer than people think they would, and actually they're finding that the cars are breaking down before the batteries are, which I never thought would be the case, especially when your phone can't even last 2 years. But battery recycling technology is massively improving as well, and because there's going to be so much money in it, it's going to be such a big business that if companies can extract the materials they need for their batteries from the batteries, then they don't need to do the digging up in the first place. So yeah, that's kind of my 2 cents.
Thank you for your answers, panel. We'll tee up another question. We've got time for another couple, I think. Just on a personal note as well, it's anecdotal, of course, but I think Craig probably knows this, but in early to mid-May I moved full-time, but literally living on a canal boat between Bristol and Bath, actually, and the only source of electricity was a solar panel. You know, 2 of them installed, there are 2 installed on the boat. And I'm not joking, I mean, all of the power came from that. The winter was a slightly different matter, you had to crank out a generator sometimes, but I go in and but it's totally achievable to actually live fully from solar panels. And there's some of the other boaters in the community who've got some very high level technology, small batteries, and the lithium ones, which are a little bit more like a bag of sand each. But wow, they can run low voltage washing machines, and then another boat, I've been living up in the valleys for the last couple of months, literally in the mountains. There's huge wind farms up in Regos, and it's amazing to see these beautiful, elegant, I don't know personally why people complain about these things, they're like beautiful, giants, you know, they don't affect the atmosphere. I can't see anything. It's beautiful. In fact, they complement it. Pretty magical stuff.
So actually part of the UK's commitment to reaching net zero by 2050 is to quadruple the amount of offshore wind farms that we have. And the idea is that off that energy we could power all of the homes in the UK.
That's something which is achievable.
That's the aim.
Yeah, okay, good stuff. Great. Hope for us all.
Do you want to
Yes, why not?
Yeah,
Here we go. Thanks.
So,
Thanks, Jodie. 1 second, if you will just remind us who you are, please, and that you're from Hayward Group, you're marketing director. What was your question? Who's it to, please?
So actually, to all the panel, really insightful. Do you think there's a real still lack of education when it comes to emissions about what they actually mean for a business, and that is why there is a lack of innovation to change? You know, we're all commercial businesses at the end of the day. You know, we'll move when you know it's not like we don't want to. It's the fact that it has a commercial advantage. So, you know, some of the things that you've been talking about are quite amazing, but, you know, to all of us, what does that really mean on a day-to-day basis? You know, do we need to have more signage within organisations about switching the lights off? Do we need to be, you know, aware in the workhouse kitchens and stuff that there is an impact by doing things? So it's an open question to all of you, really, about education, about what it means.
I think for me it's still about leadership, because that drive will have to come, I think, ultimately from within industry. So as we start to print out invoices to customers, we add in the CO2 saving, and it's increasing that awareness. It's got to be at the C-suite level. That's where I see change has to happen. I mean, at C-suite now, you've often got sustainability managers that sit at that level. I don't see the change happening at transport manager level at the moment. Middle management, it's got to be higher up. And I think ultimately that, I keep hearing that businesses now focus on profitability and sustainability, and they've got an equal part. I'm not quite seeing it. I think we need to tip the balance with legislation fundamentally. And one of the discussions we were having with the hydrogen project in Doncaster, the local council can tip that balance by thinking about their congestion charges in the future, and that would influence buying of vehicles and distribution. It's not in the local government psyche at all at the moment, and it's not at national level. I mean, the government's a bit of a mess, isn't it? So, until all that's sorted out, it's clear leadership followed by legislation, and then that flows down to industry, which then impacts on what you do at home. Think about the IT, the way that IT was rolled out in industry years ago. Your IT was always better in work than at home. Now it's switched. So that's my thoughts as leadership.
So thanks for the question, and I'm going to put a slightly different slant on it because my husband's a geography teacher. So if you're asking a question about education, I feel obliged to say that, you know, those of us who are not at school, I'm going to include everybody in the room in that category, maybe we're needing some further education on this topic, but certainly the children who are currently in our secondary school system and who are being taught by fantastic geography teachers like Mr. Bottle are getting a really high level of understanding of some of the topics which are going to become increasingly important. And you know, there are plenty of opportunities to educate yourself. Coming here today is an example of that. You know, CPD is really important for all of us, and learning more about what we can do to make a change is a responsibility we should take very seriously.
Thank you. Okay, another question. We've got time for another couple, please. Let's, sir, if you could stand up, remind us who you are, which your business is, and also a question for the panel.
Yeah, Will Waters from Forward magazine. The question to everyone, but particularly Clare, you talked about that sort of low level of, that 5% level of solar panels of warehouses. What is the next step that's needed to bring that up? Why is that still so low? And what are you doing to help kind of promote that? Push that forward?
If I'm absolutely honest, I don't know why it's so low. I wish it was higher. In terms of what we're doing about it, certainly at the UK Warehousing Association, as I described, we're trying to raise the profile and provide toolkits for our members to make that a bit easier. But alongside that, there are some regulatory things that we're seeking. So, for example, in England, if you install solar panels, it doesn't automatically make your business rates go up. But in other principalities, it does. So in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, your business rates go up straight away. So we've been lobbying the government to say, well, this is a bit unequal, and it also seems a bit perverse to add in extra cost. And in certain areas of the country, the investment in the grid has been really lax. So I'm talking about West London, where we are now, Oswestry, Corby, Nuneaton. There are certain pockets of areas around the UK where what's called the distribution network operator, the kind of middleman in between your warehouse and the national grid, these distribution network operators have failed us. They've made promises about investments that they're going to make sure that the infrastructure is up to scratch, and then they haven't made those investments. They're supposed to be regulated by Ofgem, and it doesn't work. So this is another topic that we've been lobbying the government about, to make sure that the grid is ready for a different kind of generation of electricity. You know, most of the infrastructure of our national grid would have been built at least 50 years ago, maybe 60, 70 years ago, and it was designed around a concept where you have massive coal-fired power stations, and they're the main source of electricity, and they're distributing it out to all of our properties, whether that's domestic or commercial. In a future world, that network has to be completely different, because we're going to have distributed renewable energy. Hopefully we're going to have community energy systems, and the grid can't take it. And that's something that we, the warehousing sector, can't fix. Government has to fix that.
Good.
Thank you. I know that my question is quite relevant today because we spoke about it earlier on, and I know that Clare is the vice chair of the Women in Logistics. So earlier in the week, I went and did a bit of a panel for Doncaster Chamber speaking about women in business, and if there is any such thing as a glass ceiling. So I would like to know, to the ladies that are up there tonight, do you think there is a glass ceiling in each of your industries? And how did you overcome it, if you do believe there is one?
Okay. Yes, there's a glass ceiling. And I think it's a mistake to imagine that there isn't. Being a woman in a male-dominated industry can be a challenge. And the way to overcome that is not for men to expect women to fix that problem. The way to overcome that is for all of us to collectively fix that problem. Because, let's be honest, as we look around this room, we see a lot of middle-aged white men. And I welcome all of you, because I think you've got so much power, probably more power than you think you've got, to be able to help empower those who don't fit that stereotype. There are lots of people from different ethnic backgrounds, of different age groups. It's not just a binary thing about men and women, but I do think as we empower a more diverse workforce, we open up new and innovative ideas by trying to avoid groupthink, where everybody comes from a similar background and has a similar way of approaching problems. I mean, come on, we're all logisticians. And the heart of logistics that makes it so fun is that it's about troubleshooting. And when you troubleshoot with a diverse group of people, it's much more fun because it's much more effective. So yes, there's a glass ceiling, and it's up to all of us to fix it, not just women.
Amazing. Yeah, I guess kind of playing on the element that we're all involved in this narrative is that I think something really simple to do is make it a welcoming environment for anyone to be in. I think the only times that I've felt maybe uncomfortable as a female in my role is when I wasn't made to feel welcome, and that is the role of everyone in the room. I think I've been very fortunate in my upbringing. I've always been empowered to be who I want to be. I did engineering as a degree, and at no point, even though it was a male-dominated industry, at no point did I think I can't do this. And I think that is because of a lot of support of not only the females around me, but also the men in my life who were like, okay, you can do this, and it doesn't matter, what the other barriers are. And so I think, empowering and making sure that everyone feels welcome in a scenario is a really great way to kind of break those barriers down.
Great stuff. Let's have a round of applause. A great question and two great answers. Thank you very much indeed, Kerry. Look, this conversation could carry on. I know there's many other people who want to ask questions. Perhaps you can pick that up over dinner if you like, and maybe we'll return to this topic in a conference or two, because it's a fluid situation, both in terms of what we've just been talking about and what Kerry's drawn our attention to, but also in other macro issues such as literally what's going on right now and some of the things that you've shared with us from your sector and the broader sector as well, but also from a very specialist, almost scientific point of view as well. With that in mind, we're only running a few minutes over, but I just wanted to say thank you very much indeed to the panel for the first time actually coming here. And also a special nod to Felix. I think, as you said, it's your first time in a public forum like this on a panel, a keynote speech effectively, and long may it last. And the best of British luck in all the things that you're doing in particular. And to the rest of the panel, from everyone here, huge vote of thanks. It's a really interesting conversation from different backgrounds and different parts of the sector. And hopefully you've triggered some conversations which will carry on over dinner and beyond, and in the marketing and in the media and the magazines, and some of the messages and the hashtags we'll see in LinkedIn in the days coming towards us before the next event in April.